When the Sun Darkens, Orbital History and 2040 AD Return of Planet Phoenix by Jason M. Breshears. Read by Kevin Stevens, also known as Grendel Dark. Chapter 6. Modern Cursed Earth Periods. The gods give us signs of future events. If we go wrong about them, it is not the divinity, but men's interpretation that is at fault. Cicero. Quoted by Ammianus Marcellinus, Book 21. In the 1st century, Anno Domini, A.D., the Roman world was the apex of nations. Its engineers and architects were unrivaled. Artists were brilliant copyists of older Grecian masterworks. Its statesmen were compelling orators and historians, its warriors being the legionnaires, the knights and praetorians with their traditional Trojan-styled apparel. The whole wide range of human endeavor was at its height, and Rome was the epicenter of this activity. What we boast today as contemporary invention and innovation was already precedent at Rome. Even the bikini bathing suit, so fashionable in the present, is but a shadow of the beachwear of Roman times, as clearly seen upon the frescoes excavated from Pompeii from underneath the detritus of Mount Vesuvius. This terrible volcano that buried the settlements of a pre-Etruscan race provided Rome with a sturdy foundation for their own unwitting cities, Herculaneum and Pompeii, resort luxury cities wherein were enjoyed all the vice and vanity the affluent could afford. Brothels and sex slaves, gambling and taverns, all the best money could buy was enjoyed when the mountain again buried a civilization in 79 AD, and the result was also the same as in 1687 BC. The entire region was buried, and newer topsoil and flora provided a new landscape for fauna and people who built towns and villas over this area. But Rome had been warned, though no one was watching the signs. The cursed Earth system of 414 years also applies to days in the longevity of individuals and cities. Mount Vesuvius did not end the lives of so many, and so violently, without first providing the inhabitants of the land a warning. The warning came on February 5th, 62 AD, when Vesuvius trembled, and Herculaneum and Pompeii suffered from an earthquake. Then, after the passage of 6,210 days, in 79 AD, Vesuvius unleashed the wrath appointed, and the Roman cities suffered the effect of their curse with the burying alive of Pompeii and Herculaneum, as well as the sorrowful demise of our hero, historian Pliny the Elder. The warning? It is found in the lapse of 6,210 days, for this is 414 times 15 days, which parallels the entire length of the cursed earth chronology in years, as we will learn in this work. But this is a far cry from the really sobering reality of the 62 AD earthquake in the Roman dominion. The 62 AD quake began a cursed earth period against all of Rome. This was the exact year, 414 years later, of the fall of Rome in 476 AD, when Odoacer the German defeated the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus, a most famous accomplishment that altered the demographics of the entire Roman-occupied world and Europe. Rome's end mirrored its beginning, for as a multitude of early Roman historians attest, the Romans were descendants of the Trojans that lost out in the Trojan War against the Mycenaeans and their Greek allies. The Trojan War was in 1229 BC, see Chronicon, or 476 years before the city of Rome was founded by a young king named Romulus, paralleling the fall of Rome in 476 AD. The synchronicity is so profound that the majority of scholars attribute Rome's origin to a mythical past, despite all of the ancient evidence. The descendants of Troy integrated socially through mass marriages with the local Etruscans of Semitic stock, as well as the Latins also in Italy. Through Rome's history, an influx of people descended from the Israelite tribes deported by Assyria in 745 BC, and again in 721 BC, joined the Roman peoples, as well as many from Judah. During the centuries of imperial dominance that Rome enjoyed, their official seal and standard was of the phoenix, and only in later Roman times was it changed to the eagle. When Rome fell, the descendants of the Israelite tribes that had merged with the Cimmerians, Scythians, Goths, and the Celts, or Gauls, had become independent cultures and populous throughout Europe and Asia Minor. The fall of Rome began the emergence of the 10 kingdoms, which were prophesied to come by Daniel, people described in the scripture as iron mixed with miry clay, Japhetic Semitic blood. Rome itself was the dreadful beast, also called the Iron Empire. The transition from phoenix to eagle denotes an empire in decline. But this decline not always refers to a nation's might, but infers more of a moral decline. The values of early Rome, when it was a republic, were no longer upheld, and the imperial attitudes toward other cultures had degenerated into a hardline master-slave relationship. Which leads us to another strange coincidence in the history of planet Phoenix. Roman civilization was supported largely by slavery, for slaves were owned in the majority of households and by virtually all land owners. Often, the transaction of deeds for land also meant that all slaves attached to the regions were purchased or sold. Slaves were used in commerce and industry, and even trained in academics. Even the legions had slave trains, people in bondage who served the soldiers by cleaning, cooking, providing weapon maintenance, and sex. As Planet Phoenix traversed the inner system in 246 AD, as it continued its ancient 138-year orbit, the Goths flooded the Roman provincial region of Dacia in a full-scale invasion, and the Dacians were no more heard from in history. Be it either assimilation with the Goths or genocide, the Dacians loyal to Rome vanished. The incursions of the Romans into Roman-occupied lands struck an intense fear into all landholders and Romans, but were met with cheering and jubilance by the immense slave populations that regarded the Goths as liberators. The 10 kingdoms of Europe were a political extension of the authority of Rome. However, they were sovereign people actually listed by Niccolò Machiavelli, who never cited nor hinted he was aware of the prophecies of Daniel. Machiavelli wrote that the 10 kingdoms emerged with the fall of Rome. The Lombards, Burgundians, Franks, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Vandals, Heruli, Suevi, Huns, and the Saxons. These kingdoms would contend with each other for supremacy for 1,300 years. These offshoots of the 10 tribes of Israel, who had been forcefully integrated by the Assyrians with the Indo-Germanic tribes of the Scythians, Cimmerians, and Gimri, who were also under the yoke of Assyria, were to provide the last days' Iron Empire with its stock of peoples, a mixed nation that would fulfill the role of the empire of adoption, 13th tribe of Israel adopted by Jacob. This 1,300-year period, from the fall of Rome by German invasion until the founding of the United States of America out of 13 colonies in 1776 AD, fulfills the prophetic timeline of the emergence of the Iron Empire, the United States founded by Anglo-Saxons, descended from the German tribes of the Angles and Saxons, sons of Isaac. And the original seal of the United States was none other than that of Phoenix. Remember this fact, for it will prove even more astonishing later in this book. The center of learning in history, astronomy, geography, philosophy, and foreign theologies was at Alexandria, Egypt, famous city of the Macedonian kings. In the year 389 AD, Christians persecuted the scholars of the famous library there, a ploy designed by the religious propaganda of a local bishop with a personal vendetta. Men, under pretend religious indignation at the assumed offenses of a famous female mathematician and philosopher named Hypatia, dragged the woman off of her chariot and violently stripped her naked before the people, parading her through the streets like a criminal, until men gathered en masse with oyster shells, and while holding her down, others flayed her alive inside a church. Many priceless books were burned and lost that had not yet been hidden by the stewards. It was events like this that led to the Dark Ages, when European nations were plunged into the abyss of ignorance. Counting 414 years into the future after this persecution of knowledge and the knowledgeable, the seed of learning had fallen from the west and had, almost overnight, emerged back in the east, in Baghdad, in Babylonia, among the Islamic scholars who inherited many of the books from Alexandria that Muslim invaders had taken, men hungering for the learning that Europeans neglected. The treasures of Alexandria at this time were dispersed by Muslim merchants along the trade routes and found their way into the courts of many European kings. In 803 AD, the Islamic Empire seated at Baghdad had among them the most influential scholars in the world. Further signifying the darkening of Western intellectualism and the rise of Islamic light was Alexandria's reconfirming of its curse in 415 AD. In this fateful year, the Archbishop of Alexandria had the library raided by his Christian agents, and most of the books not approved by the bishop that were not yet secreted away were burned. Reconfirming the curse that fell upon Alexandria in 389 AD, the bishop ordered that all of the scholars share the same fate as Hypatia. In accordance with his mandate, the historians, scholars, mathematicians, geographers, and stewards of the library were stripped and flayed alive using oyster shells. The second event was 414 years before, 829 AD, when the Caliph al-Ma'mun had built Islam's first astronomical observatory and at Baghdad. Al-Ma'mun was a scholar himself who appreciated learning and had the first Islamic chart on astronomy drafted. Additionally, it was this same man who in 820 AD tunneled into the Great Pyramid at Giza and discovered the formerly unknown and hidden ascendant passages and chambers. This year, 829 AD, was 207 years, half of 414, after the establishment of the Islamic Hijra calendar in 622 AD. As this is half a cursed earth period, we are not surprised to find that 829 AD begins a cursed earth period to 1243 AD, which began the final year of the Crusades of the Christian-Muslim wars over Jerusalem, which climaxed in 1244 AD, when the Islamic armies took Jerusalem for the final time. After this, both the Muslim and Christian worlds would suffer a curse: the inclusion of the rampaging Mongols that would crush the Abbasid dynasty at Baghdad and make excursions into Europe, leaving blood and ashes in their wake. The oppressive influence of the official church over the European kings made the Crusades possible. The first Roman imperial Christian emperor was Constantine the Great, who had put an end to the religious persecution of Christians and moved the seat of Roman power from Rome to the older Greek city of Byzantium. It was this figure in history who gave recognition to the Christian church, which is why 414 years later, in the year 751 AD, a cursed earth period after Constantine's death in 337 AD, the Roman Church enforced the donation of Constantine. This is a document produced by the Church, allegedly written by the hand of Constantine before he died in the year 337 AD. This document claimed that on his deathbed, Constantine gave the entire power and wealth of the Roman Empire to the Church, including the right to crown and dethrone kings. Though many believe the document to be a fake, the Church had become so powerful that this move went virtually unopposed. This Church takeover of the courts of Europe led to the first move against the royalty of Europe, an attack against the Merovingian kings of France. The Merovingians, disposed by treachery, were particularly despised by the church officials because these French kings had previously disavowed the church to interfere with all affairs of state. The Merovingians claimed direct ancestry from Israel, particularly from the descent of the kings in line with Solomon and David. In 751 AD, the divine right of kings became the divine right of the church, and the entire course of European history would have been drastically different had not the European monarchies allowed the papacy to control state affairs. It has now been proven by Lorenzo Valla that the document, Donation of Constantine, was a fraud from its inception, for it was written using biblical passages quoting from the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible. The Vulgate had been compiled by Saint Jerome, who was born 2 decades after Constantine's death. The document had to have been composed about 50 years after Constantine died. After the Mongols came, it was the turn of the Turks to terrorize Europe. In 1062 AD, the Turkish armies invaded Greece and virtually destroyed Greek Christendom as well as northwestern Italy. This began the Turk offensive against Europe. During this cursed Earth period of 414 years, beginning at this date, the world endured changes and disasters on a global scale tantamount to those we reviewed concerning the 552-year Phoenix cycles, 2239 BC, 1687 BC, 1135 BC, and 583 BC. In 1066 AD, according to Geoffrey Gaymar's L'Histoire des Anglais, the people from England witnessed a fire in the sky that burned brilliantly, which came near to the earth, appeared to move erratically, then descended into the sea. In many places, the forest caught fire. Following this comet, the Normans appeared on the shores of England and began, as the overlords of the Isles, forever changing the English culture. In 1084 AD, the Normans even sacked Rome. In 1095 AD, Pope Urban II called for a crusade against Islam. In 1096 AD, Peter the Hermit answered the call by leading the First Crusade. In 1099 AD, the Crusaders of Europe butchered those they came upon, instead of delivering the inhabitants of Christian Antioch, Edessa, Jerusalem, and Tripoli in Libya. In 1138 AD, a quake killed 230,000 people in Aleppo, Syria, and comet activity increased alarmingly in 1150 AD. In 1169 AD, Mount Etna in Sicily erupted, and an asteroid impacted the moon in 1178 AD. From 1194 to 1202 AD, flooding, quakes, and plagues decimated Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. In 1209 AD, Pope Innocent III initiated the horrific Inquisition that would result in the hideously painful deaths of over 1 million truly innocent victims of church tyranny. In 1214 AD, the Mongols invaded China, while in England the following year, King John enacted the Magna Carta. In 1219 AD, the Mongols utterly laid waste to all of the Persian Empire of Khwarezm, and in 1241 AD, these Asian marauders invaded Poland and Hungary. In 1254 AD, Pope Innocent IV authorized torture as a method by which the Inquisition could use in extracting a confession of hearsay, and in 1258 AD, the Mongols crushed the Abbasid dynasty in Baghdad. In 1260 AD, several comet groups were born by a close pass of Nibiru, see Anunnaki homeworld, and in 1268 AD, a quake killed 68,000 in Sicilia in Asia Minor. This is only half of the 414 years that began in 1062 AD, with the Turkish invasion of Greece. In 1274 AD, Kublai Khan, grandson of the infamous Mongol ruler Genghis Khan, tried to invade Japan with an expansive naval force that was drowned in a typhoon. 7 years later, in 1281 AD, he again attempted to invade Japan with an even larger navy, and again, a typhoon buried them in watery graves. The Habsburg dynasty of Austria began in 1276 AD, one of the ruling elite families of the world, reigning through its global bank holdings. This dynastic timeline began a 476-year countdown to the 1952 AD establishment of the Bilderberg Group, a collective of secret elitists allied together under Prince Bernhard, a descendant of the Habsburg royal bloodline, for the founding of a world government, a virtual revived Roman Empire, which fell in 476 AD. Major earthquakes resulted in the deaths of millions around the world in 1290, 1293, and from 1298 through 1314 AD. And from 1298 through 1314 AD were also documented many comets, falling stars, plague mists, and other strange astronomical phenomena. In 1314 AD, mankind actually witnessed with his own eyes a great blackness eclipse the stars as the gigantic Anunnaki planet Nibiru passed through the inner system. See Anunnaki Homeworld. It would not re-enter our inner system and be seen again for 732 years. More quakes, comets, and meteorite impacts occurred in 1333 AD, and the Hundred Years' War began between England and France in 1337 AD. In 1346 AD, the Black Death plague began to decrease the world's population, having first started in Asia, spreading through the Middle East and Africa, Asia Minor, and the coasts of the Mediterranean, then into Europe and perhaps even in America. In 1353 AD, the Byzantines, Greco-Roman Christians of Constantinople, previously destroyed by the Turks in 1062 AD, now acquired the military assistance of their former Turkish enemies in their struggle against the Serbian kings. The quake of 1356 AD damaged the Great Pyramid, and Muslim engineers began extracting the white polished limestone casing blocks for rebuilding materials, even erecting the famous Mosque of Sultan Hassan in Cairo. In 1362 AD, 300 years after this cursed earth period began tolling, a North Goth expedition sent by King Magnus of Norway explored North America 130 years prior to Columbus's discovery of the American islands in 1492 AD. This 130 years is a tenth of the 1,300 years from the fall of Rome in 476 AD to the 1776 AD start of the United States of America, founded by descendants of Norse and Gothic peoples, among others of Germanic ancestry. These explorers from Europe left behind the Kensington runestone, which was found in Minnesota in 1898 AD. This stone recorded the account of their exploration of North America and a battle between them and Indians that resulted in some of their kinsmen's deaths. This record and expedition of 1362 AD was precisely 414 years before the 1776 AD beginning of the United States. In 1368 AD, the Mongols were ousted from China, and in 1400 AD, the Burning Times were begun, when European governments and the papacy conspired to confiscate the wealth of tens of thousands of widows left behind by fallen soldiers of the many wars and crusades. The church labeled them as heretics and witches, tortured them until they confessed to imaginary crimes, and then burned them at the stake before the people. Once dead, the state and the church split their spoils. Joan of Arc was burned alive in the Hundred Years' War in 1431 AD, and the same year Vlad Dracul was born, later to become Dracula and Vlad the Impaler. His life is integral to understanding how this cursed earth period unfolds, which began in 1062 AD. During Vlad's life, the printing press was invented by Coster of Haarlem in 1440 AD, a Dutchman, the victim of a theft by his assistant, who took the invention to the one man now believed by largely everyone to have invented it, Gutenberg, who actually only improved upon it. In 1453 AD, the Turks captured Constantinople exactly 100 years after the Byzantines had invited them into Europe in their war against the kings of Serbia. Constantinople was named after the Roman Emperor Constantine. As Rome's first and last ruler was named Romulus, Constantinople's first and last ruler was named Constantine, the final one being Constantine XIII. It is interesting to note that Rome fell in 476 AD, and that 476 years after the fall of Constantinople was the year 1929 AD, when Vatican City and Rome became an independent sovereign state within Italy. In this same year of 1453 AD, when Constantinople fell, Gutenberg printed his first Bible, and the Hundred Years' War, lasting 116 years, ended. Vlad was alive in these years and remained a constant vex to the Turks. In 1456 AD, a bizarre comet with two tails appeared at the time that Vlad Dracul was ruling in Transylvania, Wallachia. He was made infamous throughout Europe and in the Turkish world for his habit of slowly impaling people, transfixing men and women upon stakes, and erecting them in a field before his castle in a fate more painful and slower than crucifixion. In 1459 AD, Vlad the Impaler killed 30,000 merchants and others in Brasov, Transylvania, by impalement on St. Bartholomew's Day. His wicked traits inspired both the Blood Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who bathed in the blood of hundreds of young girls she emulated, and Ivan the Terrible of Russia, who nailed people's hats to their heads. In 1461 AD, Mohammed the Conqueror set out to kill Vlad Dracul for his successful exploits against the Muslim invaders and his impaling of all Islamic captives. When the Turks reached Vlad's castle in Tirgoviste, they were repulsed by the sickening sight of over 20,000 people, erected high in the air upon stakes that penetrated them through their private parts, many of them still alive and moaning in a hellish chorus of agony. Dracula escaped, but in 1476 AD, exactly 414 years from the Turkish invasion of 1062 AD, the Turks captured what they considered enemy number one, Vlad the Impaler of the Order of the Dragon. He was decapitated and his head prominently displayed, impaled on a stake at Constantinople. All of these events and more occurred during this single 414-year span of human history, beginning and ending with the Turks. For the full accounts of these events, see Chronicon. We have seen that the cursed Earth system was originated by the mechanics of astronomical phenomena. The 414 years relates to the lesser periods of 138 years, the actual orbital period of planet Phoenix, 138 times 3. The 414 years is also found in other parallels. A comet was recorded by Europeans to have been visible in 1348 AD. The same year, a pestilential wind affected Cyprus and many died of asphyxiation during an earthquake. By this time, millions of Europeans had died of the Black Plague. Now, 414 years later, in 1762 AD, astronomers reported that black, unknown objects passed between the sun's surface and Earth's position. Interestingly, 1762 AD was exactly 4,000 years after the Great Flood in 2239 BC, 1656 AM. In the year 1490 AD, a meteorite shower rained upon Central Asia, killing 10,000 people, while on the other side of the planet in Ireland, at the Ox Mountains, a volcano erupted, killing livestock and people. This was 414 years before 1904 AD, when a meteorite collided into the earth near Alta, Norway, and a fungal blight killed virtually every chestnut tree of America. In the previous chapter, it was shown how 5 cursed Earth periods was 2,070 years, and now it is to be noted how 10 cursed Earth periods, or 4,140 years, is also a significant period in human history. We discovered earlier that Ubaritu, the 7th king of the Anunnaki before the flood, began his reign in 2291 BC, 1604 AM. The Mesopotamian records of his reign and kingdom were preserved upon Sumerian and Babylonian tablet texts. His first regnal year before the deluge began a 4,140-year countdown to 1850 AD, 5744 AM, when archaeologists discovered the ancient underground and lost library of Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, renowned for his researches into pre-flood texts, at the ruins of Nineveh, which yielded approximately 1,000 cuneiform tablet and cylinder texts concerning Assyrian history, prehistory, politics, regnal periods, astronomical tablets, financial transaction, and accounts about the 7 kings before the deluge. Of even more mind-numbing coincidence, if ever such thing exists, is the calendrical fact that the Great Flood in 2239 BC, 1656 AM, which ended the reign of the 7th king, began itself a 4,140-year timeline to 1902 AD, 5796 AM, the end of the cursed Earth chronology of 414-year period spanning back to 4309 BC, when the pre-Adamic world was ruined by the rebellion of the Anunnaki. What shocks the conscious is the fact that 1902 AD, 6,210 years, 414 times 15, after pre-Adamic Earth destroyed, was the year the archaic Babylonian tablets known as the Enuma Elish were translated into English from Akkadian. These same texts recorded how a planetary body, called Kingu, was responsible for the destruction of the pre-Adamic world, which began the cursed Earth chronology. Kingu and the Anunnaki were mentioned in these older writings, and we have to wonder if Kingu is not the original name for the planet our predecessors knew as Phoenix, a planet that when visually seen denoted a change in kingship. The year 1902 AD is integral to our thesis, for so much transpired in this one year that another chapter will have to be devoted to explore it. Now, having ascertained that the differential between the Phoenix cycle and the cursed Earth period produces the 138-year orbit of planet Phoenix, we will now review the history of the world in 138-year Phoenix orbits.